Hi, folks. Kim Mitchell here. You know, however you choose to get around, your ATV, your snowmobile, your boat, car, if you have a motorcycle, all these things take 100% of your attention and skill to operate safely. Alcohol impairs that, and bad things can happen. So, be smart, okay? You know what I'm going to say next.
This message brought to you from the Safe and Sober Awareness Committee.
We're back on Fresh Waves. We're talking with Sue Reynolds about therapeutic writing. And you run a lot of workshops.
I do. Mm-hmm.
In the writing world, both for the person who wants to be the next Dan Brown or J.K. Rowling, but also for therapeutic reasons. Mm-hmm. So you are a psychotherapist?
Mm-hmm.
How was that? Was that a good education? Pretty
fascinating, and it never stops, right?
Yeah,
yeah. I would say that's one of the richest and most satisfying arenas of my life. But I'll also say that it's intimately engaged with the writing world that I do. I won't say I can't separate them. I mean, clearly I can make a separation, but so often. I mean, we're talking about story, right?
So they're intertwined.
Absolutely. Yeah. People's stories, the way they regard themselves, the narrative they have about themselves. It's intimately locked up with how they feel about themselves, how they interact with the world. And if you can affect how the story someone's telling themselves about themselves, you can affect the way they engage with their lives. For sure. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because in the author world, mm-hmm. in days of old, when people wrote under pseudonyms, and there was a culture that sort of told the story that authors were weird individuals. They were all eccentric. They were all strange. They were, men writing with women's names, women writing under men's names, and trying to be these people that they really weren't. And even Hemingway, he had all these mental issues throughout his entire life. And there's even movies about authors just being completely odd individuals, definitely off the grid. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. No. Really well put together, quote unquote, and I hate doing that because I don't even like it in real life, the little finger things, but what people consider to be average, normal people can be wonderful authors.
Absolutely. Although I often think the drive to write initially comes from maybe not having had the perfect childhood where you were properly mirrored, where your parents were really focused on validating, that you had a right to your own thoughts, opinions, feelings, and so on. And I think often people who turn to writing as a way, to be heard, to hear themselves, it's because they haven't had that experience as a child.
Interesting.
That's my theory.
Do they do therapeutic writing with children?
That's a really good question. I don't know of any.
Sounds
but of
like
course,
a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, so often with young children, things are done in art. You'll know this.
Yes.
And then you get the child to tell you the story about the art verbally, right? But they don't necessarily have the writing skills.
Right.
I mean, so again, I'm going to pop back to the AWA method for a minute. I mean, one of our fundamental tenets is that if you write, you are a writer, right?
Yes.
So the thing is, I believe that if anybody is able to engage with literacy, and put their words down on paper, they can consider themselves a writer. Like they are engaged in the act of writing. So, yes. Ergo, right? Yeah.
Okay. So how would you conduct then, if someone is listening to this and they're thinking, well, maybe I would do a workshop in therapeutic writing. And they may think that they have had a trauma in the past, whether they've been diagnosed necessarily with post-traumatic stress disorder. I think there's a lot of people walking around out there who have PTSD who don't even know it. How would they picture what this workshop is going to do. Walk us through the steps of what a workshop looks like.
Okay, so I'll talk about sort of a general workshop, and then I can talk specifically about writing if you've got PTSD.
Right, but sometimes, like I'm saying, people don't know that. They might discover it during your first workshop and then realize they have something to work on. Right.
So if you're going to write in a workshop with, a number of writers around the table, and I'm going to say an AWA workshop, I've experienced lots of different kinds of workshops, but I am totally committed to this method because of the way it supports and makes a safe environment. So, there'll be the normal kind of group activity. We'll make sure that everybody understands the guidelines, how we're going to keep the space safe. And then I will offer a prompt. It's, sometimes I read a poem. Sometimes I, will, as we did earlier in the set, offer a sensory based, thing. I might start with, actually, I'll just take a little sidebar for a moment and offer you something that Natalie Goldberg gave us way back when in the workshops. She said, if you're stuck for a place to start, there are always 3 places you can begin. One is begin with the words I remember, right? And the thing is, even if you don't know immediately what comes after that, you can say, I remember. Wait, I remember. If you keep faithful to the pen moving across the page, your brain is going to supply the next thing, right? It gets bored really fast. There's if anybody is listening who's a meditator, you know that your brain never shuts up. So you go, I remember. You'll go to, I remember the way the earthworms would crawl out of the ground when there was a heavy rain. I remember the smell in the air after a heavy rain. I remember the dots in the top of my sandals, my little red leather shoes. I remember, and you can start with that kind of disconnected, I remember this, I remember that, and connecting back in a sensory way to your childhood, to your experience, your teenagehood, your young marriedhood, your being in school, whatever. And if you stay faithful to that and you just keep your hand moving, your brain will start to fill in what it wants you to connect to. So that's a kind of general thing, right? So I remember I'm looking at.
Yeah.
So I could start, I'm looking at Brenda's tanned arm on the other side of the table. I'm looking at the bracelet of blue stones. And then before you know it, I'm connecting to a time where I was, in Northern Ontario, mining for amethysts. I'm immediately I start to connect to my own life and I go sideways. Like the prompt is only ever a diving board to get you into the thing. Right. Into the story. So I'll offer a prompt and I always say to people, I'm going to offer something. If it's not working for you, start there. Say, I have no idea what to do with what she just gave me. Why did I sign up for this workshop? Everybody else's pens are flying.
What a waste of time.
Exactly. But the thing is, you don't do that in your head. You do it on the page, right? You commit to moving your hand across the page. And again, your brain will not shut up, right? It's like, okay, enough with this, objecting. What do you really want to write about? What I really want to write about is, what my neighbor said to me yesterday. And you're off, right?
Right.
Often when we finish writing together, people will say, oh, I didn't do this right? But then there's no way to do it wrong, right? If you're engaging with what your brain gives you, you're doing it perfectly. If you're moving your hand across the page, capturing your thoughts, capturing your ideas, capturing that inner discussion, you're doing it perfectly. And the last one is, I'm thinking about. Or I'm thinking of.
Oh my.
Yeah.
That could be a 400 pager.
Exactly. So there's 3, you never have to be without some place to start if you've got those 3 little prompts, right?
That's true. Okay. So you would start these writing exercises. Do they have 2 hours to write?
No. In a class, 10 minutes, right? Yeah. That's the other thing. You set your timer, and for that length of time, you do not let your hand stop moving. You're writing, even if it's objecting, right? Even if it's, I've come to the end of what I had to say. When is the bell going to go? I don't want to be doing this.
You don't get one of those clocks that goes tick, tick.
No, you don't get one of those.
Okay, so you keep saying your hand is moving, you never stop writing.
Exactly.
Does that mean that these workshops where you're doing therapeutic writing don't involve people typing on a laptop?
No, typing on a laptop is fine too, although I am a big advocate of writing by hand. I think the brain operates differently when you write by hand. Mm-hmm. And also the thing with a laptop is the editing is just right there, right? It's so easy to think, no, I want to change that. You just cross it out, go back. Whereas if you're writing, if you're committed on the page, you tend to keep the flow going. So, I'm not a big fan of people doing first draft writing on a laptop. Now, sometimes people have mobility issues. They really need that, and that's great. But if you can, I really believe in pen on paper. So, we do that. I'll give them a warning when we're almost at the end of the time so that they just know to, sort of finish that sentence, finish that thought. We offer the optional reading and feedback, and we go from there. Sometimes, often actually, people, when they choose to read aloud, like my lawyer example from earlier, they cry spontaneously. They don't even feel like there was anything sad about what they wrote, but it's connecting to something that they're feeling that they're out of touch with. Right? Just somehow moving that through this space in the throat, mm-hmm. which is, of course, also the space where you feel grief. You know that feeling
yes.
where you're about to cry and you feel like you've got that chicken bone stuck sideways in your throat?
Absolutely.
So there's something about moving the words, moving the story through that space that can trigger tears. And in that case, in the workshop, we just hold the space. We nobody runs over and hugs them. Nobody shoves Kleenex at them. Nobody pats them on the, we just wait. We trust that the person is able to, go where they needed to go. Their brain gave them the mm-hmm. words. They say it. And inevitably, I haven't talked in here yet about the fact that I've been, offering, writing workshops in the jail with incarcerated women for the last 13 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. And I actually did my undergrad thesis on that program. And the women say, well, first of all, incarcerated women aren't supposed to show negative emotions. I mean, we talk about, not having a place to put negative emotions here in the outside world. Yes. In there's a much bigger embargo on the negative emotions. They talk about what a relief it is, how surprised they were that they cried, what a relief it is that they cried. They hate doing it while they do it, but they say, I felt so much lighter when I left the workshop. And it was a place that I could do it and it was okay, right? Mm-hmm. If I want to cry outside of here, I have to go in the shower so nobody knows I'm doing it.
Odd. That's a weird culture when you think that it's all women.
Yeah, well, they're carrying a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a general writing workshop, and even there's a lot of sort of unexpected therapy that happens just simply by getting in touch with one's story. It's funny, actually, people sometimes cry even when they're writing fiction, right? They empathetically connect to their characters and the story, and they're moved to tears. The thing is, if you are somebody who has had a traumatic experience and is suffering from PTSD, writing can be a very valuable way of getting in touch with what's gone on for you. People who've had PTSD experience the world differently. Things are often very chaotic in their brains. They have a lot of trouble kind of holding on to the linear thought patterns that the rest of us do, like things that are easy for us, deciding, how to get up in the morning, the order of things we're going to do, how to get out of the house, where to go here, what order we're going to do things in. That's a real effort and a struggle for them. And there's something about writing with trauma survivors. One of the reasons that Pennebaker put forward, one of the theories Pennebaker put forward for why writing is so therapeutic, is that when people have been through a chaotic experience, and the chaos is still swirling in their heads because it hasn't ever been finalized, it hasn't ever been processed. When you write something, you have to do it in a linear fashion, or it makes no sense, right? You have to put the words in a linear order, or you can't express yourself. So just the act of like, what word comes next? What word comes next? What do I have to say to complete this sentence? You know, how am I going to tell this story? This sentence first, this word after this word after this word. It's actually imposing a structure on the experience that you haven't been able to impose on there when you've got that hamster wheel of your brain running around and around and around. Yeah. So.
Not interesting. So for PTSD, this is quite an effective therapy.
Yeah, there's a wonderful, if you're interested in PTSD, there's a wonderful, wonderful book by Besser van der Kolk, who is one of the premier researchers in PTSD. He's been doing it for 30 years. He's with, I think, University of Massachusetts. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. And in that book, he's talking about, you know, why regular psychotherapy doesn't work. Talk therapy doesn't work with PTSD survivors. And he talks about all the kinds of therapy that do work. And there's a big chapter in there on writing as a therapeutic practice with trauma survivors.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's
writing is a great thing. Writing is a great thing. Reading is a great thing.
Words are great things.
Yes.
Yeah, words are a way to transmit our experience, to build connection and build intimacy, to build community. I'm a huge believer in the transmission of words.
Yes, I think there's magic created in writing. And there's magic that happens when you do a writing workshop. It's interesting.
No question.
I really, really believe in the power of the written word in a psychotherapy sense. I think it really has a big impact. I mean, there are people who have huge moments when they do other aspects of expressive arts, but writing and music are the two that really seem to bring it out in people, that really give them the thing that they're looking for. Earlier in the show, when we played that song Again and Again, which is an instrumental piece, you know, some people like to have music in the background when they're doing writing exercises, and it's really good to use instrumental music because it doesn't get you caught up in the language of the song when there's lyrics there that you're paying attention to, or foreign words in a language that you don't understand, because then the vocals actually become another instrument within the instrumentals because there's not an understanding of lyrics involved. So that's for anyone who was curious as to why did she throw in that odd piece of music at the end of the first hour. Well, that's why I did. So that you can see that there's some real imagination that happens when you hear some of these instrumental pieces. So if somebody's been listening to the show and they want to know how to get a hold of you and how to take your workshops and when the next one is, and they're all gung-ho, give us some info.
Okay. So my primary website is actually, we're just changing servers right now. So right now, if you want to get to the website that's listing all the courses I'm doing this fall, you would go to inkslingers.xyz. Normally it's inkslingers.ca, but we're transitioning from that server, so that'll be repointed in a few days. But this morning, inkslingers.xyz would be the website you would go to. I'm teaching in Uxbridge this fall. I'm going to do a 6-week workshop at the end of October, starting October 31st, called A Novel Beginning. And that is just sort of about discovering how to discover story in your life, how to, you know, those ideas that float through, those things you see, how to determine whether or not what you're thinking about is a better suited to a short story or essay, or whether it's better suited to a longer project, like full-length memoir or a novel. We'll be developing those ideas in the course, and if people are interested in working on something short, we'll be polishing up a couple of stories that they might want to send out for publication, or developing the beginnings of something that'll be a long project. I'm also, every September, back to school time, I do something called a novel approach, which is a 10-month course to produce a full-length manuscript, either memoir or fiction. So that my course starts...
Nothing makes the writing go faster than a good deadline.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's how this course is structured. Every 2 weeks, people are to produce 3,000 words. And by the end of the 10 months...
How many pages is 3,000 words?
12.
12, okay.
Double-spaced. So, I mean, you can do 12 double-spaced pages in a morning, But, going back to my earlier comment, I advocate doing it every day or every other day to do a smaller chunk, right? To keep in touch with those characters so they don't start looking at you with rage in their eyes. And over the course of a year or the 10 months, the students produce work of about 70,000 words, which is a great sort of first draft, full length book.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah. My favorite, I do work with novelists, but I have to say my favorite for the year-long course are memoirists. And to go back to your thing about therapeutic writing, the testimonials that I get at the end of the year, I had, a couple of years ago, I had one woman say to me, I have been in therapy off and on all my life. And she had a difficult childhood. She said, this year of writing my story is the most therapeutic thing I've ever done.
So her novel was her own story?
Her memoir.
Her memoir.
She was writing a memoir.
Wow.
About her own life. Yeah, the memoirists are my favorite, but that's my bias as a psychotherapist, right? Another woman last year said, when I look back on my life, she was again saying how helpful writing her own story had been. And she said, when I look back on my life in years to come, I think it'll be that was pre-novel approach and that was post-novel approach. Like, it's really, to spend that long on your own story is profoundly affecting.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, it's interesting that you said that. We usually put out at the beginning of the show, although we forgot to today, that anyone can send us their questions on Facebook, but I do that in my Facebook post the night before. And we've had someone that's just sent, I checked, and we've had a listener that just posted, I want to quit my job today. Am I being too impulsive? Should I write about this? What do you think?
Interesting. Absolutely.
We're coming up on lunchtime, so maybe she has an hour where she could sit down and do...
Absolutely. And a great place to start is with that sentence stem, right?
Right.
What would happen if I quit my job today? And then, have her just write it out. And particularly, I'm not quite sure that I put the emphasis on this that I need to. If you're interested in writing, expressively in writing to investigate your life, your psyche and so on, you want to check into the feelings, right? So what is it that has me feeling, it's important for me to quit my job right away? Mm-hmm. What would support me in this if I wanted to do this? What would be the challenges of wanting to do this? Once you start unpacking it and breaking it down, things that seemed impossible can seem a lot more possible, or that impulsive jump to do something like that, you begin to see, well, I can't actually quit my job today, but this is what I would need to put in place to give myself a year off or something like that, right? And you can begin to work towards it. Whereas if it's just that hamster on a wheel, thought going round and round, you can spin there for years and never make a move.
There's so much to ponder.
There is, yes.
And I guess that the point that we've been talking about all this morning and in this last hour, don't ponder so much. Write it down.
Yeah, ponder on the page.
Ponder on the page.
That transforms it.
That's a good idea. Ponder on the page. Okay, so you have lots of workshops coming up, and there seems to be lots of places for people to start. They don't have to jump into the deep end. They can just start dabbling on their own. There's a lot of journals out there right now. The 5-minute journal that Mr. Icon has put together, and it has little prompts in it that you can do. There's just getting a notebook. A regular notebook. And now's the time to get a notebook. There are a lot of them out there because going back to school is right now. So the kids are there's a myriad of notebooks to choose from.
Absolutely.
I don't know about you. Do you have special notebooks that are your favorites?
I do.
Well, me too.
Yeah, I do.
The ones that I have, the ones that I just make general notes in are completely different from my journal, which is sacred. And then there's my learning book that's stuff that I've learned that's, more school based, and that's its own book. And pens.
Mm-hmm.
What about pens as a writer when you're using pen and paper? Don't touch my pen.
That's right. Do not borrow my pen. Exactly.
At home, I hide them. Because with 4 kids at the house, even university students, they'll come home, do something, and then all of a sudden, 8 pens are gone.
Oh.
Where are they gone? They were one. It's just a pen, Mom. Get over it. But it's not.
I do want to make a plug for engaging with others in the writing process. That's
an interesting thing.
Find a writing community, because the problem when you're writing by yourself, not journaling, but if
journaling is your own thing anyway.
Yeah, journaling's your own thing. And I think with journaling, we can really give ourselves permission to stay in that first draft, process only, no pressure environment. That's not a problem. But if you have any aspirations to write fiction, to write something to go out into the wider world, it is so easy to question our ability we have no scope for understanding the value of what we've written. We're constantly doubting ourselves as writers. And the big gift that being part of a writing community can give you is belief in yourself as a writer. A constant encouragement until you have the confidence to really trust that you have some ability and that you can put your words out there and not be ashamed of them.
And from a writing therapy point of view, that's also important, I think. If you start doing the really heavy work, it's nice to have a safe environment with people there, the people that can catch you or support you when you're going through your stuff.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's not safe to do it on your own. It's much healthier to do it where there's people there.
And of course, your journal, your Writing for Therapeutic Value journal, is a tremendous tool if you're in therapy with a therapist as well, a psychotherapist, because you have your, say, once a week or once every 2 weeks hour with your therapist. In the meantime, you can continue to process what happened in that time, other things that are happening, and you can post it or highlight areas that you want to take back into your next hour with that person and share with them, right? It's not just sort of thought and it's gone. And I wanted to remember something to tell him. What was I going to say?
Yeah.
It's there. It's explored. You can read it. I have a number of clients who bring their journals into the sessions with me, and that'll be a starting place for where we're going to work this week.
Interesting. I never thought of that, but that makes perfect sense.
There you go.
There you go. Okay, we're going to close off the show today with an interesting thought. I know a person who had quadruple bypass surgery, and before they were allowed, so to speak, to do the bypass surgery, the surgeon said that they had homework to do before the surgery, because what he found was there was a pattern of 5 years to 7 years down the road, he was getting the same patients back for the same surgery again. So what he needed was them to unpack what was making them make the choices in their life that they were making. And he asked them to write an 8.5 by 11 page every day for a week. And that increased to, by the end of it, they were writing 5 pages a day.
Wow.
Leading up to the surgery. And he said it could be about anything. This is a flowered tablecloth with pink flowers and green flowers and leaves and purple, and then there's some green. Whatever you wanted, as long as it was words on a page.
Right.
And it just shows you that there is more to this than meets the eye, that there is some real validity and some science behind how wonderful expressing yourself through writing can be and how powerful it can be.
Yeah. There's a huge thrust right now in the medical world for what they call narrative medicine, which is that the person is not just, the body with the condition on the bed. The person is their story.
There is a human being there. ACEs with children now, that they're finding the adverse childhood experiences and all the effects that it's having on the baby boomers and the adults of the world right now. There's so much to talk about. We could do this for another 2 hours. So we will do that again. At a later date, we will have another show, and we'll bring Sue back, and we'll dive into this even more. You've been listening to Fresh Waves here on Whistle FM. We podcast these talks so you can listen again at freshwaves.ca. And if there's any questions that you have, you can get a hold of us. Jay, how do you get a hold of us?
You can get a hold of us here at the station, 905-640-1027. We're also on Facebook, Fresh Waves on Whistle FM, and also on Twitter as well at Freshwaves Radio.
And you can try and get a hold of us through any of those methods. We'll pass your questions along to Sue. And I hope that everybody goes forth today and has a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. And Sue, thanks for being a guest on Fresh Waves. We've really enjoyed having you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Okay, Jay, take it away.
I've been afraid of big words since I was a kid. I thought that I'd get over it, somehow I never did. Usually it's no big deal, but every now and then you're audaciously loquacious. It kicks in again. I went to a specialist and said, what's wrong with me? Based upon your test results, it's not hard to see. You're afraid of lengthy words, you're not the only one. Here's what your condition's called, but this won't be much fun. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. If you're afraid of big long words, here's one you should know. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. I'm not even joking, believe it or not. Though it's absurd, that's the word, I don't like it a lot. There's one thing I know for sure, so listen if you please. Whoever came up with the word did not have the disease. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. If you're afraid of big long words, here's one you should know. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. I was in my science class when I started screaming. It was 'cause of a video the teacher was streaming. It was about a lung disease, I hope they all get better. But whoever named it gave it way too many letters. I mean really, who would name a disease pneumono-ultramicroscopic silico-volcano-coniosis? Not very sensitive to people who have hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. If you're afraid of big long words, here's one you should know. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. If you're afraid of big long words, here's one you should know. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. If you're afraid of big long words, here's one you should know. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia. Hippopotomonstrous quipedaliophobia.
Been listening to Fresh Waves, a Whistle FM production. I'm your host, Bren Masson, and our technical producer is Jason Rumball. Tune in every Wednesday at 10 a.m. for Fresh Waves here on Whistle FM, 102.9 on the FM dial and whistlefm.com anywhere in the world. Fresh Waves is available on podcast too. Just go to whistlefm.ca or freshwaves.ca. We podcast all of the Fresh Waves shows so that you can listen at your leisure. Fresh Waves. It really is fresh.